Since its beginning in 1983, Platform has been described as an environmental campaign, a performance art group, an alternative energy co-op, and a forum for political dialogue. But essentially, Platform is an idea, a way of working based on three key concepts: ecology, democracy, and interdisciplinary creativity. Our aims are ambitious, but explicit: to work towards the creation of an ecological and democratic city. Our means are what we call interdisciplinary creativity, a method of bringing together people from a diverse range of disciplines to share their creative abilities and apply them to social and ecological problems. It's about creating problem-solving visions. The results vary widely in form. In the past, they've included a 2-day parliament for local people, a durational performance in a nomadic tent, installing a permanent micro-hydro electricity generator in an urban river, creating a musical performance with primary school children, a utopian vision for a local renewable energy scheme, a ritual action during the rush hour. All these things Platform sees as art, an art that bridges, that brings together emotions and ideas that our culture so often puts in opposition to each other. The rational and the intuitive, the heart and the mind, the spiritual and utilitarian, the poetic and the pragmatic. Platform's projects are created out of love for particular places. This is a way of working that has enabled us to make long-term commitments to specific localities and citizens in our region. Our home, a tidal valley in Northern Europe, shelter for several million people and innumerable other species. Our work is driven by an optimism that things can change, that our city can tread lightly upon the surface of the earth, that every citizen can work together to shape the place they live in. Tree of Life, City of Life was an art research project. Platform brought together a team of 9 individuals from different disciplines, whose aim was to explore the impact of London on the earth and its peoples. Over a period of 6 months, we discussed and researched, planned and imagined, pooling our abilities to create a shared understanding and a form for the project. The form we devised was that of a journey in which we would step outside our normal urban lives and step into our city. A journey in a 7-sided tent with its own wind-powered energy source.
Trying to look at this part of the city, the metabolism of the city in this area, that section. Try to look at it as an organism, and if you imagine it as an organism, then every organism consumes and excretes.
The tent moved to 5 places, each chosen to represent different organs in the body. The bowels of the city, where the River Wandle meets the River Thames. The mouth of the city, Greenland Dock. The bloodstream of the city, the Nine Elms Interchange. The nervous system of the city, Coin Street. The invisible heart, London Bridge City.
James and I lived in the tent for 24 hours a day for 2.5 months. It was a durational performance that exposed us to the public and to the elements, day in, day out. During this time, other members of the team would come to the tent for discussions and workshops. As the tent moved along the south banks of the Thames, we used a variety of methods to explore the metabolism of this city without limits. We saw the tent as a kind of listening sculpture, a place where we could hear citizens' stories about their city and enter into dialogue with them about its inhalations and its exhalations.
And something like 20 or 30 ships a week moving in and out of the port.
And they'll say it's 5 bids for 10 or 5 bids for 6 or 50. It's all the hand signals, that's all you have to do, really.
It enabled us to listen to the natural and human rhythms of the city.
Well, why don't you do your pilgrimage with the Temple of Minerva?
We took practical actions, trying to effect the small step towards creating a sustainable city. One of these involved setting up a short-term recycling scheme on our local housing estate. At every place the tent rested, we created diverse symbolic actions, which provoked passers-by to confront the hidden metabolism of the metropolis. This included installations, banners, and a performance down the course of the buried river EPHRA, carrying water from source to mouth. Living in the tent had a profound emotional and intellectual effect on us. For 1,680 hours, we had immersed our bodies into this sprawling, greedy, churning city. We had spent weeks beside main roads, days listening to the homeless, hours watching the weather sweep across London. Many of our protective barriers, our filters against the reality of the city, had been torn down.
Stillwaters aimed to re-establish the link between London and the nature of its valley. Through the body of London flow many forgotten and buried rivers. We worked to return these rivers to the lives and imaginations of Londoners. We wanted to celebrate the waters that presently flow beneath our feet. 8 project participants created 31 days of public events along the watercourses of the rivers EPHRA, Walbrook, Fleet and Wandle.
The EPHRA Redevelopment Agency took the image of unearthing the River EPHRA and presented it to the local population of a part of South London, some of whom were very excited about the prospect of having a river at the bottom of their garden, and some of whom were very worried about the economic and cultural changes that this idea implied. We rented a disused shopfront on Norwood Road, under which the EPHRA flows. We transformed this site into a development agency akin to many of those then being used by the London Docklands Development Corporation. Using the language of such corporate development and advertising, we opened a visitors centre which contained a model, an exhibition and a promotional video, and invited the public to drop in to talk to us, two resident redevelopment experts, about their views.
This is a model of where we are now. EPHRA is here, and this is the Homeland pub, and a tributary to the EPHRA coming down here.
We executed a local and national press campaign which spread the idea of unearthing the river further. Our aim was to have the word EPHRA on as many lips as possible. At a public debate towards the end of EPHRA's tenure on Norwood Road, heated arguments arose between supporters of the EPHRA who, for many diverse reasons, had decided to welcome the thought of a river in their part of the city, and dissenters who worried about, amongst other things, where they would park their cars if a river were to run down their street.
Now, I don't see any great rationale for digging up anything for a river.
My vision is I'd quite like to see the roads and the cars go, but I wouldn't like to see the park completely dug up.
I'd like to have water in front of my doorway. It is the EPHRA's misfortune that it lies on some main connecting routes into town.
More adventurous local supporters began plans to start the EPHRA's unearthing at a point where the river ran underground in the local park. Thus, as the EPHRA Redevelopment Agency disappeared quietly one Saturday night, the debate continued, and continues, along the river's banks.
EPHRA are here to make this vision real. Seeing is believing.
People have asked me why, as a psychologist, I was interested in working on a project which is essentially focused on ecological and art issues. There is no one answer to that question. I'm interested in how we relate to others and how we relate to our world, the state of mind we bring to these things, whether it's healthy or unhealthy. The role of the psychologist in therapy is to increase personal awareness of unhealthy or damaging patterns of behaviour. I'm interested in the individual and the cultural state of mind, which is awake, productive, creative, in harmony with others and the world. What struck me as sad in reading the history of the Walbrook was how quickly, following the Roman settlement, it became polluted by commercial activities, particularly from the tanning and metalworks along its banks. I'm interested in ways of increasing personal awareness and responsibility. There is a parallel here between psychology and art. One challenge of the Walbrook project was how to make people more conscious of the lost river and what it symbolised or told us about ourselves. In particular, I am interested in the process of creative or positive change. The process of change for the Walbrook has been entirely destructive. The Walbrook symbolises our negative relationship to the world. If the Walbrook had a voice, it would charge us with neglect. All that remains of the Walbrook is a storm drain of polluted water. I chose to collect samples of the water to distill it, to make it drinkable, as a symbol of the potential we all have for positive change. In terms of the now, each of us has a choice. What do you choose?
Listening to the Fleet was a mobile language project aiming at encouraging citizens of the Fleet Valley to comment, through the spoken word or through the written word, on the degradation and the possible future of their local buried river. We asked, do you believe a once vital place can be brought back to life? Someone said, it can be done, no saying it won't be. But we asked, by whom? Someone else said, they sacrifice so much to business and cars. But who, we asked, are they? People from Hampstead to King's Cross and Blackfriars made comment on progress, authority, democracy and dreams. We took clay from the source of the Fleet and at locations along the river, people who were passing joined us in conversation. From there, people took clay, cleaned and shaped it into tablets, and inscribed their words about the river onto them. These tablets were then fired publicly and then hung in trees as testament. Fleet primary school children spent a week with us going on field trips to the river, learning how to handle raw clay, developing ideas for their own clay tablets, and learning how to fire them. The uncluttered simplicity of children's views gave voice to another group of citizens, the next generation. The newly elected local MP took the political temperature by attending the uncovering of the fresh-baked utopian tablets. We ran dowsing workshops, ostensibly to learn skills and to douse the fleet's exact course. Dowsing in heavy traffic bore witness to the city's loss and provoked questions in onlookers. The ancient church of Old St Pancras was built on the banks of the river. The sign outside stated that the river's fate was a closed book. People did a ritual performance, carrying fleet water in clay bowls from the source and mouth to the church. By re-gilding the sign from "the river flowed" to "the river flows," it becomes a present reality in two ways. It is, after all, still there, and it may, once again, be seen, should we want it badly enough. By devising a diverse series of triggers for discussion, we aimed to encourage a re-examination of our collective memories, a movement from passive, prescribed language to flowing, active language, and above all, a sense that water is the fluid that drenches the inner and outer spaces of the imagination.
James and I had some interesting initial discussions about the Power of the Wandle project. It was an inspiring river. The energy of the river had been celebrated in the past through religious ritual. And from the 10th to the 19th century, mills on the river had provided energy for industry without pollution. We decided to think about the idea of putting a modern-day water mill in the river. That is, a micro-hydro turbine producing electricity from the water's flow. A renewable energy system that would not pollute or deplete finite resources. We contacted the internationally famous Intermediate Technology Development Group, who promote renewable energy systems in developing countries. Following a 4-hour walk down the river, a site was chosen and a prototype design produced. At this stage, we involved the wider public through guided walks along the river, exploring the river's past and the future potential. We pointed out the turbine site, together with the design of the proposed turbine. This was then presented to a public meeting with an exhibition. Council officers, officers from the National Rivers Authority, local environmentalists and general public were enthusiastic about the idea. This enabled us to transform the concept into a tangible reality.
The project that followed on from Stillwaters was entitled Delta, in honour of the delta of the River Wandle. It had been 35 acres of marshy islands and river channels, breeding and feeding ground for numerous animals. That is, until the beginning of the last century. Since then, all but one of the river's distributaries have been buried, and the land covered by industrial units and derelict works. During this time, the majority of these works have been part of the energy industry. A coal yard, a coke gas plant, a coal-fired power station, an oil depot.
2 years' close collaboration with Arthur Williams, a microhydro engineer, produced a unique installation, the first of its kind in any Western city, generating electricity from the flow of the Wandle at the Delta sluice gate. Passing through the turbine, water creates renewable energy for the lighting of St. Joseph's Primary School and rings a bell hung from the sluice gate structure. It's a machine that turns the power of the river into sound and light. The bell is triggered to ring by the high tides and low tides, the movement of the North Sea in and out of Wandsworth. Above the bell is a stone carving of the names of animals, in honour of those who remained here and those that might return. The sluice gate structure has been painted gold, and a gold flag flies from its top, a reminder of the jewelled objects that Bronze Age peoples cast into these waters in acts of devotion. Delta was inaugurated by a night performance of a specially commissioned piece of music when 250 people followed horns, handbells and a viola along the river's banks to its mouth at the Thames. "650 metres away, at St. Joseph's School, the provision of electricity from the microhydro is being built into the new buildings, power for the lights of the music room and fuel for the watershed. This golden house stands at the centre of the school and is a home to Delta TV, playing on a monitor fueled by the river's flow. Delta TV, the watershed, and a musical performance to open the new school buildings were created by the pupils of St. Joseph's and Platform, part of the Tides and Tributes project, and a way of encouraging young citizens of Wandsworth to love their river and care for its future. Delta also had a catalytic effect amongst the adult population of Wandsworth. From its impetus was born the Wandle Delta Network. This network, a gathering of individuals and local groups working to maintain and develop the area for the benefit of the community and the natural environment, has organised a river clean-up and a vision day and is organising a festival. Meanwhile, the renewable energy aspect of Delta has been taken forward by Renew. This is a Millennium Initiative inspired by Delta to establish 2 centres, each at the heart of a defined area of cityscape, in which Renew will install renewable energy systems, carry out energy efficiency schemes, enact ecological projects, and have arts and education programmes. All these will combine to help pockets of London have a more sustainable energy pattern by the year 2000. Delta fulfilled our desire to create projects that combine the poetic and the pragmatic and work towards a sustainable city.
In pursuing Stillwaters and Delta, Platform had worked to provoke an increased respect for this great tidal valley and a greater understanding of one of its natural resources, water. Arising from this local work, we felt a need to think again about wider relationships. What of those places far beyond the city's political boundaries, upon whose resources we draw, and about which we know so little?
In Homeland, we really went back to our roots, in as much as the first work we'd ever done in Platform, years ago, before Tree of Life, City of Life, focused on trying to create links between different communities of people who were, in a sense, invisible to each other. The question we posed to ourselves was whether it was possible to connect people, not just across a town or a city, but across vast international trade systems. What is the connection between our home and other people's land? Whose lands do we depend upon for our needs to be met? In Homeland, we would try to make the invisible world of trade visible to recognise the human hands and faces behind the label of producer. Only when people can see and believe in others' existence can you begin to talk about empathy. We chose to focus the project on the story of how light comes into our city. Light, a most intangible substance, yet by breaking down its components into copper wire, bulb, and electricity itself, we managed to trace the points where these materials were extracted or manufactured to 3 sites in Europe. We spent months building up contacts with the Portuguese, Hungarian and Welsh communities in London. Finally, we began touring the city in a truck, visiting 9 points of relevance to our story of light coming into the capital. The back of the truck opened to reveal the Homeland house, a 2-room installation, with tables and chairs in front where people could meet the project workers and translators, and begin what could sometimes be a 1 or 2 hour dialogue. We started by asking people to explore their notions of home by drawing representations of the places or times in their lives when they had felt most sense of belonging. In the subsequent recorded interviews, we went on a journey through people's very personal stories to questions of how they might relate to the people in Portugal, Hungary and Wales they depended on for their light. But beyond the beauty of the installation that hundreds of people had helped create, like seeing people's souls displayed, as one visitor put it, the real artwork was the often remarkable dialogues and exchanges that took place. Out of so many, it is hard to select, but 2 stay in my mind. A young woman suggesting that London could once a year have a festival of light, where for a few hours there would be no electricity, where the absence would highlight just how much we take the people who create our electricity for granted. And a Hungarian woman in her 80s, who after an hour of dialogue looked up with a mischievous glint in her eye and said, "But if people had to know exactly where everything came from, as you're suggesting, and who produced it, well, it would make capitalism unworkable, wouldn't it?"
After the 1992 Earth Summit, more and more people are grappling with a new concept, a new image of ecological footprints. London requires a footprint of 120 times its own land area to feed its appetite for resources and deal with its wastes. We would need tens of planets if all the world's peoples consumed at such a rate. An urgent question for Europe is how to grapple as a culture with the reality of this footprint. We have an optimistic vision of London's ability to pioneer new forms of lifestyle and livelihood that can be enjoyed by all the world's peoples and not just a limited few. We reject the siren calls for imposing barriers between us and the poor South. Rather, we aim to develop a vibrant democratic culture that places our currently cold commercial relationships with distant, far-off places on a basis of respect and sustainability. From the valley of the EPHRA to the copper mines of Nebish Corver, from the Wandle Delta to the oil fields of the Niger Delta.